Hello, and welcome to a very special episode of Cybersecurity Sense. I'm your host, Mark Burnett, and I am pleased to be joined here today by the LBMC PCI QSA team that was able to attend this year's 2025 PCI Community Meeting. I've got Stuart Fay, John Cartwright, Brian Willis, and Kyle Hinterberg with me today. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining, and I am really looking forward to our conversation. I know the community meeting for me is always so much fun. I think this was my seventh year attending, and the favorite part for me is when we get to see our clients in person. A lot of times we go the whole year and we may even do most of their assessment remotely, or we're working with some of them who aren't in the corporate office. And so we're interacting with them virtually. But when we get to see them in person and share a smile and a handshake and a meal, it's always rewarding. And so it was great for me to be together with our clients. And I know you guys enjoyed it as well.
Yeah, Mark. When I think about the community meeting, it's a small space. There are lots of competitors there, and that's one of my favorite parts. Actually, is to just catch up with not just necessarily just clients, but competitors and vendors that are offering products that you're interacting throughout the year. And so, I agree with you. It's always a great time.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. You're right. It's a smaller conference than some of the others that those of us in the industry go to, and so you get to know each other pretty well, and it feels like it definitely community meeting is a good word for it. It feels
Yeah.
like a community. So, well, gentlemen, I know there are several things we want to discuss, but I want to start out first with Brian and Kyle. I know you guys got to share some thoughts on the main stage at the community meeting again this year, and it's always fun. I know we submit topics for consideration, and obviously the conference organizers go through and they select things. And you guys have been in the agenda for several years now, and so why don't you share a little bit with our viewers and our listeners about what your topic was about this year?
Mark, absolutely. We had a chance, something Brian and I, and across the board here at LBMC, we're pretty good about is vendor management. And that's always a huge thing from PCI, but just cybersecurity in general. And a lot more, I know everyone's heard about it, but for the past several years, moving out to, your full supply chain and thinking about more than just your third parties, but your fourth parties, your fifth parties, et cetera. And, something we did to kind of open it up is talking about it. And if you look back for, a few years back in last year and the year before, more often than not, most of the big breaches are actually being caused by, third and fourth party vendors. And there was one, example we had where just a few years ago, there was a really large file sharing solution that, ultimately got breached. And it's nothing against them. All organizations, can have this happen to them. You can't always stop it, but they were a fourth party supplier for a lot of organizations. And ultimately, this one breach is believed to have impacted over 2,000 organizations with hundreds of thousands of individuals. And again, because they were tended to be a fourth party, a lot of those organizations didn't even know that they were breached until weeks or months after the effect. I'm assuming that there were probably many security analysts for several of those companies seeing this breach happening in the news, and they didn't even know that that was their data because of that that fourth party connection.
Right, and of course, Kyle, what presentation on third-party service provider management would be complete without actually walking through the requirements themselves? So we spent some time in our presentation doing just that, talking about each of the sub requirements. There's five of them, and for each one, giving sharing our experience. What have we seen with our clients in industries that have been effective means of satisfying those requirements? We gave some examples of those. We gave some suggestions, recommendations, best practice, if you will, for meeting those requirements in requirement 12.8. And I think that's, hopefully that was very helpful to the audience there. We also talked about the concept of non-attested third parties. So, of course, one of the things that makes the job for not only for an entity, but for an assessor as well in assessing a third party is if they're already compliant and have an attestation that demonstrates that. But in those situations where it's a third party that isn't already PCI attested, that makes the assessment a little more difficult in that now we've actually got to go and assess those third parties ourselves. So we gave some recommendations to the audience on how to prepare for that, how to avoid those situations. Of course, making sure that you're only using assessed and attested third parties if you can, but also, what are ways to manage those, and particularly, what are the challenges there for performing the assessment or for making that assessment easier. Kyle, then of course, we talked about another interesting aspect with third-party service provider management, and that's around how important it is for that program to support the other requirements within the PCI standard that have to deal with the services that they're providing.
Yeah, and one quick thing too, I just wanted to mention that I feel like a lot of people don't always think about, and I even had some people come up after the presentation and mention it as something they hadn't thought about was, when Brian was saying about for those sub requirements, essentially one of them is that you need to collect all of your AOCs from your third parties, all the ones that are PCI compliant. They have their attestations. The really nice thing that an AOC has, versus some other types of documentation like a SOC 2 or other third party validated documentation is that the AOCs list all of that company's third parties. All of the third parties that they're relying on for PCI compliance has that full list right there. So if you have a whole lot of PCI compliant service providers, you can get all of their attestations of compliance, collect that list of all of their service providers, and you have a start on all of your fourth parties. Because that's always the difficulty when you're thinking about fourth parties. How do you even identify who they are? And so that is a kind of a short way to get that and start looking at your fourth parties. And then when you're looking at some of those other requirements, like the one of the big ones in my opinion is in 631. It says you have to do vulnerability management, making sure you're paying attention to the vulnerabilities that might be affecting your environment. And one of those sources is going to be your third and fourth parties. And so again, if you have like a threat intelligence team, you should be making sure that they know who all your third parties are, but then pulling out your third parties to get those fourth parties, giving that list to your threat intelligence team as well so they can start paying attention to them. And then if one of those organizations pops up in a breach, you can start doing some triage and figuring out, are you affected or not? Those are really some of the easy wins I think that organizations can start to do to better manage their third and fourth parties.
One other thing I think it would be interesting to note is that for the first time, the council has said that they're actually going to post all of the presentations from all three of the global community meetings that they're hosting to their YouTube channel. So they used to keep those behind not necessarily a paywall, but they were only accessible to certain parties, and they're going to make those publicly accessible through their YouTube channel, so folks will be able to actually go out and see our presentation. I believe they said look for those in Q1 of next year.
Brian, that's great. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, I understand that you guys have recently been requested to do this particular presentation or a similar version of it at a different conference coming up soon. So congratulations. It sounds like, obviously the information was very valuable. And one of the things I always appreciate about how we approach this particular practice is we always look to try to make it easier for our clients and anticipate some of the challenges they have. So, Brian, you talked about the best practice tips. I know that we had printed cards at our kiosk there in the expo hall for people who wanted to come by and grab one to have as kind of a desk reminder of those tips and things like that, as well as a checklist of most common missed items. And so I thought it was great for me when people came by and they said, "Can I have those?" Well, absolutely. We want to make things as easy as possible for you. So I know if people would like those, they can reach out to any one of you, and you'll be happy to email them an electronic version of those documentation.
Absolutely.
Good, good. Well, gents, thanks again, and congrats on a great presentation. I certainly enjoyed sitting in the audience and cheering you on, and excited to see your presentation on the PCI Community Meeting channel once it's available. Now, I know one of the things that's really important in the community meeting is that there are sessions that we can attend whether it's the actual council themselves that are presenting information or other practitioners that are sharing some of their best practices and things. And John, I know there was one particular session that you went to that you were sharing with me when we were talking at the event, that it had some interesting insights. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that session and some of your takeaways?
Yeah, sure, Mark. Of course, there were several interesting ones there. Saw one on a software security framework and finding bugs within it. Did a pretty deep dive, and that was nice. We had Kyle and I went to one. It was on the main stage, a big hacker hunt, and it was a lot of fun. Played a game with the whole audience. One that I thought was interesting though was using AI to review vendor documentation and your own AOCs and rocks. AI was a big topic at the conference, as it is in our entire PCI and cybersecurity world right now. But this was interesting on what AI can do for you, and what it can't. I mean, of course, it can parse through quickly some documentation, and you can tell it to look for certain things. It will pull those out, and it will help you review documentation a lot quicker. Um, a big point of emphasis though was to be careful how many things you ask the AI to do, though. It can do a lot, but it gets full. Kind of the example that was used was having if anybody has small children or had small children and remember and getting them a list of chores to do. Well, you may put 5 on the list. Um, they get through 2 of them, might be done well, might might not. But they can get it. AI is a little bit the same way, right? It'll go through and do the first few pretty accurately, but we've all seen that sometimes when you use an AI bot like this, you start getting some interesting information or some odd information. Part of the example that the speaker used was it would say a certain item belonged to a certain requirement in PCI or SOC or whatever the framework was. And it was like that requirement just doesn't exist. It just made that up from whole cloth. So I think just like any input with a system or machine, it's only going to be as good as the person using it and the person putting in the input. So yeah, I thought that was really interesting. Also, Kyle, you were in that same session. Did you have any comments, or are these kind of your takeaways also, or what did you see?
Yeah, I would totally agree, and I thought it was, good and interesting, but at the same time, the individual preached a lot about, AIs can benefit you, but at the same time, you can't really trust them. And it was funny too because he talked about how, had taken this AI, gave it, the instructions to, look through all of these third-party documentations, be it AOCs, SOC reports, etc. And, here's my set of requirements, make sure they're compliant. And what it sounded like is the first time he would ask it to do that, every time the AI would come back and say, "Yep, they're good, they're covered, they do everything you need it to do." And then he would look back at it and be like, "I know this isn't true." He was purposely feeding it information that he was expecting to flag.
Right.
And so then he would go back to the AI and be, "I don't really think that's the case. Be more strict." And then it would go back through and then it would identify all the problems. And what he found to be really interesting though is it was impossible to ever have the AI do it in one pass. He would try to, on the first pass, say, "Hey, be very strict, make sure you're pulling out all this stuff." But every time on that first pass, it would, give him a pass, be real lenient. And then on the second time, it would have a second look and then be able to identify those problems. So again, it shows where AI can be beneficial. And if you need to go through dozens of vendors that you're trying to cover, that can maybe be a good way to take a first pass, but you still can't entirely trust it. We're definitely not to that level of AI yet.
It,
Yeah.
it sou- I was going to say, it sounds like you needed to almost tell the AI it was wrong. Just be prepared for the first pass. Just come back saying you're wrong before you even look at the answers. Look again, and all of a sudden you could expect it to be more right.
Yeah, my takeaway on that conference or that presentation and some others I've seen outside of PCI is the same we're hearing over and over again. I mean, you can't trust AI for the types of things that we need exact information on yet. It does a really good job of a number of big things, but there's just in today's world too many variables that it's going to make up. And in our line of work, that's just not acceptable. And so I think the big takeaway from me is we all really need to make sure we're um, putting the reins in on how much we're relying on it. Using it as a tool is one thing, but relying on it to give us, de facto answers is another.
That's a great point. And Stuart, before we move off that topic, I'm curious to know, have you seen or heard anything specifically from the council regarding the use of AI in the PCI ecosystem yet? Is there anything they published supplemental guidance, or did you hear them speak specifically on that?
They came out with and I don't remember if it was an FAQ or just kind of a statement, essentially saying that it's not against the rules to use AI, but be careful. Is what they said. I do know they're working on more AI types of guidance that'll come out in sometime in the future. But right now they just basically put out a statement saying that it's not, we know that's being used and just be careful.
Okay, great, great. And Stuart, as the leader of our PCI practice, I know you've been going to this community meeting pretty much ever since the PCI Security Standards Council established it as an option. And one of the most valuable sessions for you, of course, is the closed door session that's available only to assessors. So, are there any takeaways that you got from that you want to share with the group?
Yeah, Mark, the one session I find the most valuable out of all the sessions, if I could only go to one session and then leave and still be felt like I accomplished something, was going to the assessor session that is open to both QSAs, but also into ISAs as well at companies. Exactly why the council does that is beyond me, but nonetheless, it's always a very good session. And one of the things, there were several things that I thought were valuable in there, but the one that I thought I wanted to mention specifically here during our session here was some clarification about within FAQ 1588, and it really boiled down to clarifying some of the definition of the terms that are being used. And so, in some of the documentation that the council has out there, they talk about the payment page, and specifically as it relates to 643 and 1161. And what was clarified during that session is that for SAQA eligibility, as you may not remember, that the council has said, hey, if you're just doing SAQA and your service provider is handling 643 and 1161, you're good. The clarification was when they're talking about the payment page, they're specifically talking about for SAQA the iframed third parties payment page that's embedded in your website. And that was really good clarification, because in some of the other wording that the council had used, it made it seem like they were talking about the hosting page, right? Your site, if you're acme.com, and then you're hosting, bank.com's iframe. In some of the earlier documentation, it made it seem like acme.com site was the one that needed to be evaluated for 643 and 1161. But they just clarified that no, when they say payment page, it's really that bank.com iframe only. And that's where you need to validate that your third party is handling that. And so that was makes a lot of sense. It was just because of the way they'd been using the terminology and some other documentation that was the confusion. And so to me, that was very valuable. I think a lot of people who were in that session also felt that one was valuable.
Okay. Well, I know there was another topic, Brian, that you captured through your conversations while at the community meeting around authentication guidance. So, why don't you share a little bit about what you learned around those?
Sure. Well, just prior to the conference, the council published some new guidance documents around authentication. So, guys, with the latest version of the standard, there was some revised or enhanced, some may say, guidance around or requirements around authentication. So, traditionally, multi-factor authentication was required for I believe just remote and then administrative access into the CD, and then of course with now it's all access into the CDE. And in the new version of the standard, they introduced this concept of phishing resistant authentication. And really, they are talking about MFA, and so I think because there's been a lot of questions about what do you mean by that, and some different interpretations that that individuals had that you could read on the internet and so forth. They published some guidance documents, two in particular. One is really just a summary document that really hits the high notes on what are the authentication requirements. There's some good graphs on there to illustrate, authenticating through VPN versus into, connected to or security impacting systems, and then ultimately into the CDE proper to illustrate, hey, what are the authentication password versus MFA versus phishing resistant and so forth. So it's a good summary document that might be a one that various entities would be good to review. And then there's a more in-depth full guidance document around 35 pages or so that goes into greater detail about all of these concepts and principles of authentication. And again, I think one of the aspects of this that has been most interesting to me has been the concept of phishing resistant authentication. Now, in last year's conference, Kyle and I attended a session that talked about that. And due to the brevity of the session, it really didn't get in too much into, well, what exactly is that and when do you really have to use it? So even to me, it's still been a bit of a mystery, but the guidance document is helping to clarify that. So I think it's worth a read through for anybody, particularly an assessor, but also any entity to make sure they understand what those different levels of authentication are. As far as phishing resistant, I think really the concept there that is, in my opinion, it is just another version of multi-factor authentication. What it's doing is it's taking out that communication channel. So they specifically talk about things like a one-time password or an SMS transition, something that could be intercepted in a kind of a man-in-the-middle attack. That is not phishing resistant. It's still MFA. You can still use it, but for the requirement where I think it's for end users that must use non-administrative access must use MFA unless they're using a phishing resistant authentication, then then they can use that instead. But in all cases, phishing resistant really is a form of MFA, and it involves some sort of pre-authentication, either through a USB key of some kind or like they use in the government, a PIV card. So essentially, it's got credentials already built into the device that you're using to authenticate. It's using public key infrastructure, private and public keys to ensure that secure transmission of credentials that's going across the wire. So I would commend both of those documents to anybody with an interest in PCI, and that those are important concepts to be familiar with, and particularly when it comes around to your annual assessment. The expectation from QSAs is that you're going to have a good grasp of those concepts, and with these documents, that allows in any entity to be more have a greater level of understanding, which will help with both their assessment as well as their continued compliance.
I was gonna say one thing I really like about that document as well is that it really goes through like a good, better, best and talks through what the baseline you need to do that's PCI compliant, and it's maybe not the most, there's always the battle between secure and compliant, and it talks through this is compliant, maybe it's not the most secure option, but it is okay for PCI, even though you maybe should do a little bit better. But at least you know where you stand from a PCI compliance standpoint, and then it still provides recommendations on how to get a better implementation.
If people have a hard time finding that document, again, they can reach out to us and we can send it to them.
Yeah, and that, Brian, I think that's another example of I made some comments in the beginning. I'm always proud of our team and how you guys endeavor to make sure our clients are well served. And so, a lot of times that the guidance documents, which aren't directly incorporated into the ROC, some people don't know about them or don't read them, but you guys always take it seriously. And make sure you're using all the information provided by the council to make sure that we're giving the best possible guidance to our clients. So, thanks for sharing that. And again, anybody wants a copy of that, reach out to any of us. We'll make sure to point you in the direction of those. So, Stuart, as we finish up, I just wanted to ask you, that one of the things we take away from the community meeting every year, we spend time talking to our clients, we get feedback, we interact with the council, the card brands, even as you say, interact with competitors, and we're always looking to make sure that we are being as innovative as possible in how we execute for PCI on behalf of our clients. So, as you think about the next year, What's your vision? What do you have any? Do you see any changes or innovations coming from LBMC standpoint that will make the PCI compliance process more efficient, better for our clients?
Mark, great question. You're right. I mean, we're constantly trying to improve our process for both ourselves and for our clients. And uh, really, what for us, the big thing right now is to improve that client experience with our portal. Right. So we've got a an engagement portal that really got a lot of cool. Powerful things that we can talk through uh, things like integrating audits together, right? So if you're one of our clients that does PCI and ISO and SOC and you name them all, we really got the ability to have our clients have one source of truth for request lists and managing the process, et cetera. And so we're really finding that our clients are really appreciating that on those more complicated integrated audits. So that's one. The other thing is we really are trying to improve our dashboarding with clients. We know that clients are busy and they want a single pane where they can go in and get a snapshot of where they are, what they need to do, what the issues are. And so those are, while we have that now, we're enhancing that process through feedback we've gotten from our clients. So that's an important part of them. We're trying to take some of that project management that inevitably a client has to do on their side and take on some of that burden, right? Obviously, we can't take on all of that burden for them, but for the things we have that ability to influence and help them with, we're enhancing those.
I think that's great. Yes, and as you know, when I first joined the firm, having been a former CISO, a lot of what I encouraged us to implement in our practices was, when I was on the other side of the desk, how did I want my consultants interacting with me? So you continue to do that, and that's a credit to listening to our clients and looking at what's available from a technology standpoint and trying to make that as good a process as possible. So well, gentlemen, we've about come to the end of our time, but I thought it would be fun if we just end with a really quick kind of lightning round and give you each one final question. And so you get a very quick 30-second answer for each of you. And that'll be kind of our sign off for this particular episode. So your question for today is, what is your favorite PCI requirement to test and why? And I will call you out and give you a chance to address the group. So we're going to start with John.
Oh, great. Pop quiz. Okay. So I'd say requirement nine. Um, a lot of assessments these days, teams are distributed, and we do a lot remotely with the advent of remote tools like Teams and Zoom and everything, especially post COVID when nobody was going into the office and everybody was collaborating remotely. Um, I do like meeting people, interacting with people, and being able to sit down and have a personal conversation. And when you're assessing data centers, they're brick and mortar and they don't move. So you can actually go in and meet people. And when you write their names in the report, you have kind of a more personal relationship with them. And yeah, I really like doing that.
That's great. That's great, John. I agree with you. That's it. It is nice when we get to interact with our clients in person in the process, and our profession has changed quite a bit since the advent of virtual meeting tools. So, okay, Brian, you're up next. Favorite requirement to test and why?
I think one of my favorites, because it's often the most revealing, is when we talk about training requirements. It's always interesting, and not just necessarily talking with the people who develop and publish the training, but the people who are charged with taking the training and retaining that knowledge. So let's say, for example, I'm visiting a store location, and I ask the folks there about the training about the regular maintenance and and tamper inspection, let's say, of the payment terminals. It's always interesting to hear the answers there, and they're always revealing about how well the concept of PCI compliance is communicated out to folks, and then also how effective the training program is. Likewise, when we talk to various folks, various subject matter experts, on the back end, the technology side of things, and we talk to them about their security awareness training or the PCI specific training, maybe they're subject to. Again, it's always interesting to hear their answers, and it does provide a clear understanding to us as assessors as how seriously the company takes their compliance obligations, and again, how effectively their training program is communicated.
Yep, that's a good one. It's a good one, Brian. Kyle, your turn. Favorite requirement to test and why?
I would say probably 11.3 for vulnerability scanning. And it's probably one of the most difficult to test. And I have a lot of empathy for the folks that need to do it because just managing and wrangling vulnerabilities is difficult. But back before I was a consultant on the other side of the table, that used to be my responsibility. And so maybe it does give me a little bit more empathy for folks doing it. But I also just find it interesting. And I love it a lot when I get to talk with a real kind of vulnerability, scan wizard, someone who can, show me all the different ways to, do reporting in Tenable because it tends to be so difficult. But that's when I guess I geek out a little bit on it.
Good for you. I'm glad it gives you a chance to unleash your inner geek. Okay, Stuart, the last word is with you. What is your favorite
Yes.
S5 requirement to test and why?
Oh man, I've got a lot, but the ones I like to test the most are the requirements around storage of cardholder data. And because when an organization is storing cardholder data, which is more and more rare these days, it means there's a lot of risk there. And I have a knack for finding card data that is stored unintentionally, right? Whether it be in log files or just in places the client didn't know. And so I find great satisfaction around that because there's a lot of risk right there. And so for me to be able to tell the client, oh, by the way, there's this data there. Yes, it's a problem, but they can fix it. And they've now really reduced a giant risk in the organization for having in many cases, thousands and thousands of credit card numbers or sensitive authentication data that they didn't know was there. So that's the one I like to test the most.
That's great. And a lot of people who haven't worked with you as long as I have don't know that earlier in your career, you were the lead penetration tester for LBMC. So unleashing that inner geek and being able to find some of that, some of that data is something that you've always been very good at. So, well, gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. It has been a pleasure to catch up, and I loved being down in Fort Worth with you guys and seeing our clients and interacting with the council and gathering this information that we can bring back and share with our clients as they prepare for their assessments, and we can give them a heads up and a peek around the corner what's coming to make sure they stay ahead of the game. So thank you all very much for listening and joining us today, and we wish you well and look forward to hearing from you soon, and stay secure.